Welcome back to Seek Strength and welcome back to the Kyrgyzstan news show. Today's news show is brought to you by the Sika Strength newsletter. There's a strength training section, S&C for sports section, hybrid athlete section, and there's also a Sika Strength news section. If you sign up to that news section, there is a big update coming to the app that's related to your monetary side of things. So make sure you sign up to that so you don't miss out on an opportunity to make sure that you are getting good value for your money. First up, we've got Joe Dae from the Republic of South Korea, and he's squatting 315 kilos. You may remember him from a couple of weeks ago from a 270 front squat and a 311 kilo back squat. This 315 kilos as a former 89 kilo lifter is absolutely gargantuan and incredibly aesthetic.
You know, I think there's three ways a squat can be valuable or it can be kind of appreciated. It's either incredibly heavy, or it might look really nice, or there might be an insane kind of body weight to weight ratio in terms of twice or 3 or 4 times body weight. I feel like this hits all three of them spectacularly well. 315 kilos is obviously insane. Him being more than likely still in the double digits with his body weight, absolutely insane, because it means it's over 3 times body weight. And then finally, just how good the squat looks. That Korean team has some exceptionally aesthetic squatters, but this is right up there with one of the prettiest you're going to see.
If he gets 320 or more, which he definitely looks like he can do, so it's mostly a matter of whether he wants to do that, it'll put him in a series Hall of Fame for squatting for weightlifters. You know, anyone hitting 320 as a non-super is massive, and there's people like Tantau, Toshiki, Archer Manchipov, and several other lifters, the current generation, who've hit that, and it is a massive milestone. So I think really for him it's a case of whether he wants to or needs to, not a case of if he can do it. Here we've got Kaiser Witt, and he's an American super heavyweight, and he's doing some 205 and 215 kilo power cleans. Kaiser's an excellent lifter, but the 215 kilo power clean is always a big day, so it's always news show worthy in my opinion.
This is one of the most horse-like things you're going to see in your entire life. 215 kilos doesn't even make sense when I'm looking at it. Obviously, he's incredibly powerful, incredibly strong lifter, very, very like a big dude moving around a lot of big weights. I think it's always going to be incredibly impressive, but 215 as a power clean just blows my mind.
What's interesting is Alex Lee is Kaiser's coach, and someone mentions about the arm bending here and saying that the arm bending isn't actually an issue. But interesting, Alex says he's leaking energy in posterior, hence the arm compensation. All this thing to work on to maximize efficiency, power output, and decrease injury rate. Shoulder gets behind losing hand to lack connection. We'll dial things in more. So definitely, I think we can make the mistake, and Carlos is probably a big example where people assume because they're lifting big weights that that's the way they do it now and they're not trying to change things. Or we see that in the strength training world with powerlifters and then similar, or even athletes moving in certain ways, and it's a mistake to assume that's what they're doing right now is what they think is the best for them, and they're often, very, very often, certainly in the case of weightlifting, always working on their technical aspects, so don't lose sight of that for your own training. And, you can get caught up in technique too much, but rarely is that a major problem in my opinion.
It's also good to see somebody who is proficient enough to be power cleaning 215 is still needing to work on things.
Yeah.
It never stops.
That was my point, Dara. So here's a good lifter to see. Jonathan Rivas, clean and jerking 210 kilos, or should I say clean and power jerking 210 kilos. He's an excellent weightlifter from South America, and he was really on top during Junior Worlds kind of maybe 10 years ago, or maybe a little bit less actually. We haven't quite seen some bigger numbers, which I thought might manifest from him. He always looked like he was capable of a lot more. I think he had some injuries, so it's interesting to see how his trajectory over this next Olympic cycle is going to go, considering how easy this 210 looks.
It's an interesting contrast. A few weeks ago, we had some of the American female lifters with squat jerks that were really good squat jerks, but very, very deep in the catch position. Here you have the complete opposite. Obviously, it's power jerk versus squat jerk, but when you look at it, the motor pattern is pretty much identical. in my opinion, this power jerk, particularly for the male side of things and the slightly heavier weight class males, is just going to be a much more efficient lift in terms of being able to stabilize the weight overhead without having to get into this really, really difficult position to attain. So certainly if you're in the power jerker or squat jerker camp at the moment and trying it out, I do think this kind of more aptly style squat jerk, the catching a parallel, is going to be more applicable for most people.
Now, sticking with the South Americans, we've got Live Strong Liv, who's doing a 105 kilo hang snatch. So this is very, very, very powerful. She is an excellent weightlifter. The low hang snatch is definitely one of the harder variations. It puts us in a position where we kind of have to force that posterior to work a little bit harder, force that back to be in a better position, which is why it's a great variation. But it's why you'll also see is that it's one of the least common hang variations to be in excess of people's maxes from the floor. So the high hang, the high blocks, above the knee blocks, above the knee hang snatches will all often exceed lifters' maxes, but it's very rarely we see anyone doing multiple kilos over their max with the low hang snatch when they're a well-trained lifter. And it's quite hard. It's quite hard to generate the speed. It's quite hard to get in a good position. It is, however, an incredibly productive lift to have in your training, and the consistency and technique here and just the kind of solid nature of the catch and the consistency in the back position, I think is a great example of why lifters might be using this.
Yeah, definitely the back position and that working on the back posture is something that's really visible during this lift. Even as she snatch deadlifts it off the floor, you can see her working for that extension in the mid and upper back, working to maintain that posture on the way down. I think as a learning point for people who are doing some hang snatches or low hang snatches in particular, is just that patience on the way down. You see how well she controls that descent of the barbell. A major kind of flaw in many people's hang snatches, they just don't control the position enough to maintain that good posture, and then they hit the bottom position, try to turn the bar around, and they really can't generate enough force then because they're slightly in a poorer posture and also just not going to be able to produce force due to the fact that they're probably not as balanced as they should be. Here you see her being really patient, slowly bringing the barbell down into that hang position, which definitely pays dividends to her in the longer run.
Girls are just so supportive of each other on Instagram. Boys are lacking. Now here's a sight for sore eyes, and a lot of you I'm sure will be happy about this. A return to weightlifting from Toshiki. So he has done 110 kilo snatch, 130 kilo clean and power jerk, and today, or from this front squat session, he did a 200 kilo front squat. We saw him doing a bit of back squatting last year, and then he seemed to have stopped it. So he has a long tail of a comeback from the surgery he had on his shin, where he had a metal rod inserted. We saw him 2 years ago, year and a half ago. It was still giving him a lot of pain, and that was a year after the surgery. So that'll give you just an indicator. What's that, about 2.5 years of recovery time before he's able to get back to weightlifting. Seems to be pretty happy with the lifting and doesn't seem to be in a whole lot of pain. Hopefully he's in no pain whatsoever now, which would be great. And he did say when he finished lifting after Tokyo that he did want to come back to weightlifting. I'll be honest, I was kind of skeptical, but I would be also incredibly chuffed if he did come back weightlifting internationally. You know, he had his little foray into bodybuilding, and it'll be really interesting to see, has that impacted his lifting? Does he have the desire and the capacity to come back now? Judging by how the lifts are looking, it certainly looks like that, but obviously the big weights are big. So it'll be something we'll be watching with bated breath to see where it goes.
Something I always love to see in a front squat is an appropriate amount of torso lean. You see at the start of Toshiki's front squat here, he really works hard to get his hips back and out of the way. This is definitely something that a lot of us, particularly longer legged people, struggle with a bit. We think we need to have this super vertical torso. You think you really need to push knees forward, and that's the only thing working in a front squat. But you see, even somebody like Toshiki, who's incredibly well built for squatting, will have to get his hips back slightly and get that slight forward torso lean. So it is great to see it. This particular angle and this particular video gives you a really clear view of just initiating that squat with knees moving forward and hips moving back at the same time, which just puts you into a so much better position.
A lot of times what that lets you do is keep your lower back in better extension for the front squat, so as a result the upper back stays in a better position. If you were to go straight down with the hips, for some lifters, We might see a tucking or a butt wink on the lower back, which isn't good for front squatting because it compromises the upper body. And even someone with the level of control on squatting as Toshiki, you'll see him doing this kind of position. Now, once you watch these heavier squats, when he gets a bit stronger, it seems to be less of a lean back, but there is degrees to it, and it's definitely something you should be paying attention to in your own lifting. For anyone wondering, I did try front squats, but I have some kind of nerve block in my forearm, so I couldn't rack the barbell. It's gone now, so I will try front squats again, just in case anyone's waiting. Here we've got Maxim Mogutchev, who is a Russian lifter. This is a 160 kilo snatch in the warm-up before the start of the 2025 Cup. And don't know much about Maxim, to be honest, but what I do know is he's got a fucking nice snatch on him, and that's why it's in the new show. Black Ram 2's really nice 160 snatch. I like the loading, very Russian loading.
Yes.
Very appropriate, very logical loading, I would say.
Very conservative loading.
Super conservative loading, very Russian technique, setting his back position, talking about back extension there again. Really nice bottom position, really controlled start position. He's not gripping and ripping. He's using a little bit of a dynamic start, but then he's setting that back position, making sure it's consistent. And this is what will allow him to lift those consistent weights in competition.
I feel like there's a massive leaning towards lower hips in a start position for most amateur level lifters because they think they're going to be able to achieve the positions that you see Maxim hitting here. It's just very, very difficult to set with your hips as low as he sets them and get your knees back out of the way and sweep the barbell back during the first pull. So it's definitely something to watch for. If your first pull doesn't look like his, though, you probably should not be setting with your hips quite that low. He just has an exceptional skill of getting his hips back and out of the way, getting that rear bar movement and leading to that very, very nice technique.
So very nice.
Oh, so very pretty.
Here we've got Ollie Saxon, an Australian lifter, and he's a big, strong dude. But we've got a 200 kilo clean from him here. I assume this is a PB. No jerk, or at least he didn't attempt the jerk. And, he's a very, very strong lifter. We've seen him snatch 160, and I'm pretty sure this 200 kilo clean is a PB for him, which is massive. Most notably, he doesn't seem to wear any belts or sleeves or wrist wraps or anything like that, which is something some people find very endearing. Not really bothered myself, but some people I do find it very noteworthy when lifters don't wear them.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth pointing out, because there are so many people who have the sleeves or have the belt or whatever. The big thing looking at Ollie for me and his lifting is how little contact on the quads there is. So it obviously leads to that really nice vertical bar path, leads him really being active with the upper body as he pulls underneath the barbell. But it is an interesting point, particularly with powerful dudes. There tends to be a bit more hip contact because they rely on that. It's definitely not the right thing to do, but it would be the norm to see that barbell hitting off the quads a small bit more. In Ollie's case, you have that really nice kind of 3 or 4 inches of contact on the upper quads, leading to that brush of the barbell, and it looks very, very good.
The interesting thing about the sleeves or the belt, obviously, powerlifting federations have different regulations on the tightness of the wrap, and you might have to put on the sleeves by yourself, and you can't use assistants and all that. But there used to be rules in weightlifting about 15 years ago. They removed it, where there was a certain amount of wrappage you could have around your knees, a certain thickness and length to your belt. But they actually removed that a few years, about 10 years ago now, because it just doesn't help you that much in weightlifting, which is one of the reasons I love weightlifting, is that you can put on all the knee sleeves and belts you want, but it's not really going to make that much difference for you. It's not going to give you a competitive advantage compared to powerlifting, for example. And Ollie also, just on the note of the start position, nice controlled start position, static start, interestingly. And that gives you a lot of technical consistency, which is very important in weightlifting.
It's funny, that whole thing of getting underneath the barbell in weightlifting is so important that the extra tightness doesn't help. Mm-hmm. That whole other second part.
Here we've got Emil Moldosov, who is a Kyrgyzstan lifter. Great country, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go there. Very nice, very mountainous, very pretty. Pretty far out of the way for most people watching this, I would imagine, going by the demographics. But they do have a small but strong cohort of weightlifters. We've got this 155 kilo lovely snatch in competition.
The speed under the bar is the real standout thing here. very, very aggressive, pulling himself under, really sharp as he gets into that catch position, which just looks phenomenal. You have to imagine there's another 5, 10, 15 kilos left there. It's really nice, it's really consistent, it's really sharp. It's definitely something that this is the type of weightlifting technique people want to watch.
That's what people need to have. Now, moving over with a board, or they do border Kazakhstan. We've got Denis Ulanov uploading some Instagram footage here. He obviously was part of the Team Almaty, Ilya's weightlifting team, pro team. We've seen him lift some massive weights in 85, like 182, 225 in training at least. And he has been on the scene for the last year since he's coming back from his ban and Kazakhstan's ban and everyone's banned and you're banned and I'm banned. We're all back. We're back, baby. So he's back lifting, not quite the same weights, but he's on a lighter weight class. What weight class he'll choose in the coming Olympic cycle will be interesting. And we've got a really nice 180 kilo clean and jerk here. He's a very nice technician, nice and consistent, really precise movements. There's no wasted positions or starts, or everything seems really, really refined in these positions. Nice catch position, holding the hook grip, really nice.
My favourite thing about Denis and his lifting in general, both across the snatch and the clean, is how well he sets that posture as he's pulling on the barbell. There is a bit of a move towards this kind of idea of not extending with your upper back, or there's some misnomers out there. You see Denis really fighting for that position throughout the first pull and second pull. He maintains that posture really well, and it just leads to that really nice positioning during his second pull and as he starts to pull himself down and under. So it definitely is one of the kind of guiding stars out there for postural strength. You would have seen a lot of it in the more traditional lifting systems, people doing a lot more postural work. Even the kind of heavy pulls off the floor definitely got to help with it, but it's a standout kind of element of Denis's technique.
Next we've got Rondell Hunt with a 425 kilo hook grip conventional deadlift. So this is 15 kilo PB for him, which is massive at those weights, and it's 14 kilos over the heaviest ever deadlift done in the IPF, which is pretty wild when you think about it.
This sounds bizarre, right? But it's not that long ago where 400 kilo plus deadlifts were insanely rare. You would have been able to name on one hand the amount of people who had actually done that raw, not wearing a suit, not wearing figure eight straps in World's Strongest Man or something along those lines. To see how regularly 400 plus is being pulled on now kind of blows my mind. Obviously, Rondell's been around for a long time. He's a really well situated athlete in the world of powerlifting, but to be doing records quite this big, so 14 kilos over the world record, a 15 kilo PB from his own record, is just absurd. It's insane how well powerlifting is growing and how much progress people are making, both in the IPF and outside the IPF, it has to be said. So it's great to see. We always say that sports like powerlifting that are growing need superstars. They need big personalities out there. And Rondell is definitely one of those.
Now, speaking of superstars and outside the IPF, we've got John Hack squatting 360 kilos. He said, I'm a squat specialist now. This is still 10 weeks out from competition, so this is a massive lift to be hitting. Considering his best squat is 365 kilos. Definitely looks like there's room to squat more here for sure. And what he'll end up doing in competition, what weight class he'll be, I'm not sure yet. I don't know if he said it. But massive squat from John. Typically competes as a 90 kilo lifter. He was talking about being finished with a 90 kilo class, not making the cuts anymore. But I'm not sure he achieves what he was hoping to. So we may see him return there. He's definitely bigger and denser than we've probably ever seen him. I think as he just gets a little bit older, he's 32 years old now, 31. So I suppose that famed muscle maturity has come in that the bodybuilders speak about. Is this the muscle maturity that they are talking about?
I'm just looking at the muscle maturity in his quads.
Are your muscles mature?
How shredded are his quads?
He looks extra shredded everywhere. That's because they're mature now.
That could be the maturity coming into him. It's something that we talked about last year as he was prepping for that last competition, as he was going down to 90 for what I think he said would be the last time, is just how much muscle John Hack holds on his frame. John Hack looks like he's 120 kilos. he is a massive, massive dude. So I'd love to know what weight he's walking around at now versus what weight he's going to compete at in a couple of months' time. But his legs look shredded. Like, even his pecs look like he's a couple of percentage points away from striation.
Now, next we've got kind of a weird one. I assume it is real. It's Dimitri 4, and he was tagged at Larry Wheels in this, which is, apparently it's a 700-pound bench press, which is 380 odd kilos, with just some elbow cuffs. I don't really think they do a whole lot, to be honest, and a belt on. It looks ridiculously easy. I assume it's real. It's just crazy. I don't think we've ever seen anyone bench weights like this at, well, I'm not really sure what body weight he is. Oh, he's 265 pounds. So it's one of those lifts where, I'll be honest, I was blissfully aware of his existence. I'm not doubting him, but it just looks way too easy on some of the reps for him to be benching that. But I assume he would have heard if it was fake now. Not to harass him or anything.
No.
If we actually thought it was fake, it wouldn't be on the news show. But it is ridiculous. Even that's 295-ish there. That's crazy.
It kind of blows my mind as well. Especially the speed on the descent and how aggressively he detents into his chest, you know. Like, I know there's some question marks people are bringing up here about, it wouldn't be comp legal because you're slamming it into your chest or whatever. It's not really what putting big lifts on Instagram is about. Putting big lifts on Instagram is about lifting the heaviest weight you can possibly do. But the speed at 500 and 600 pounds here blows my mind. Like, we've had a lot of big heavy benchers on the news show. We like looking at people lifting heavy weights. This is a shockingly fast rep at 600 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
What more are we going to say about that?
I don't really know what else to say. It's the fact that exists. Here we've got Ashley Wilson squatting 215.4 kilos or 475 pounds. Ashley is a great lifter. Most notable, I suppose, is her deadlift and her conventional deadlift. You know, around 230 odd kilos, which is huge. But this 215 kilo squat is pretty massive. She's gone for a barefoot squat, and this is moving pretty well. It's always really interesting to see, you know, powerlifters inching down into that bottom position and then just like flying up once they hit that position. So they're kind of feeling out the depth of where they're trying to get to, because you're kind of looking at it being like, oh, I don't know if they're going to stand up, and then you're like, oh, they just stood up.
I really like the positions here. We spoke about Toshiki at the start, initiating the squat with a good amount of rearward hip drive. Obviously, in this case, it's a back squat, and it's a powerlifting back squat where you're not looking for the same level of depth. You're certainly not looking for the same level of vertical torso angle. You see that kind of posterior-led initiation of the squat here, and it is very, very good. In the same way where many people could learn to push their hips a bit back a bit more during the start of the front squat, many people could learn about that initiation with the knees coming forward as well at the start of the kind of powerlifting style back squat. Ashley in this case has a very, very good initiation pattern. Hips are going back, knees are going forward. It's a really good balance between that anterior and posterior chain. The other thing I'd like to point out, and obviously this is federation specific and competition rule specific, but if you're squatting this kind of weight, like 200 plus kilos for females, 300 plus kilos, use a monolift. Like, I think this shows you just how well a monolift can serve you. Obviously, there's no miss in this case, but having those chains there, having that added protection of the monolift kind of hanging over you is definitely better than relying on 3 or 4 people to lift something that's probably 3 or 4 times your body weight off you when you fail.
Next we've got Maxon Shethar with a 370 kilo back squat for a PB for him, 10 pound PR. I have to say, of all the people squatting heavy weights in powerlifting, Maxon has got one of the most legitimate back squats. And I know the rules are to squat below parallel, which I fully understand, and we coach powerlifters, etc. But just in terms of new show judgment, Max is burying the weights and leave them within no doubt. Still squatting low bar, squatting in some kind of flats, but massive squats. He's been on a tear there for the last year or two, just putting weights up. And it'd be really interesting to see. I know he's quite young. I think he's maybe mid-20s. So he's got a lot of years left for progression and strength training. Coached by his brother, Sam, no less. So they're a dynamic, strong duo.
I absolutely love his squat. As Gerf was saying, the rules of powerlifting everybody's trying to play to the rules within their own sport, right? Whether that's getting on a good side of a referee, whether that's just barely getting to parallel with the squat, but there is something so legitimate about how he bottoms out these squats. It's every single time. There's never a question mark with it. He always absolutely floors his squats, and it's definitely something as well that, even though he's quite young and we've only seen him for the last probably 2 years on the new show here, he's making really good progress throughout. And I definitely think it's a game with younger athletes, or a game that can hurt younger athletes, where they're constantly inching just barely to that line of parallel, and they do it with all their squats in training. And now suddenly, as they get bigger and as they put on more size and weight and mass, and that biomechanical stacking starts occurring more, it becomes more and more difficult for them to hit the bottom of those squats, or to hit it consistently at competition kind of settings. In Max's case, you should be looking at him as your guiding star of how to bottom out heavy squats.
A bit of a random one for you, but we've got Jessica Bittner, a Canadian powerlifter, doing a clean with 105 kilos. Now, technique, pretty solid. She pulled herself under the barbell aggressively. Maybe a few things you would change in the first and second pull, but the dynamism is definitely there in this, which is great to see, and wouldn't really expect it. But hitting a full clean, good rack position, catches the bounce pretty well. Notably is that the fact that it's not a front squat, or it's not a power clean to a front squat, it's an actual clean, like she's pulling herself down underneath the barbell. So if she wanted to, I'm not sure if she gives a SHIT, but there's room for probably another 20 kilos onto her ability here if she really wanted to push it within a couple of, maybe not a couple of months, but a year or so of training. Not sure she particularly cares. I assume this is just some off-season shenanigans or so, but very impressive nonetheless.
What I love about this is she pulls the bar off the floor as she's trying to get her back tight. Like, that's an insane level of strength. We've obviously seen her deadlifting those massive weights before, really impressive 1RM numbers in the powerlifting world, but this is really nice overall. There's always a question mark about how that strength transfers from the powerlifting world. We've had it on just 1 or 2 news shows ago with another female powerlifter trying weightlifting for the first time. It's great to see that kind of crossover, but very impressive.
Now, moving on to the athlete section of the news show, we've got Johans Vetter, who is the German javelin thrower. I believe he's a bit of a goat in the javelin throwing community, and he's got a 200 kilo back squat here, which is very, very interesting. So throwers are a very interesting bunch, very interesting group of people. The discus, the shot put, hammer throwers. They're some of the big weight movers. They're the ones we see the big back squats from. They're the ones we see the big power cleans from. The javelin throwers, typically all we see is really power snatches, and we don't get to see a lot of the squatting from the javelin throwers. There's just not a whole lot of them uploading footage. But it's great to see someone at such a top of their game putting up their PBs like this at 200 kilos. Now, what numbers do you need is always really interesting. It's obviously something that we look at from a coaching point of view. Should we ever encounter a javelin thrower who's trying to set world records or so, you'd always be thinking, what does that person need? And obviously a lot of it comes down to experience with the sport, but also what does that person continue on their career with? What are they lifting and developing their throwing alongside each other? You can give standards, and standards are definitely important for people to generally aim for, but if, for example, you're throwing world records and you're at 190 and you get to 200 and you throw another world record, or you win another gold medal, you're kind of thinking, this is pretty reasonable, even if you might see other people squatting 50, 60 kilos more. But on the converse side of that, for a different thrower or a different athlete in a different sport, they might need an extra 30 kilos to hit the equivalent power output. So it's not exactly a one-to-one basis. You can definitely set bands and ranges with which people can generally aim for, but it's not always a case of, okay, Johans did 200, so I'll never need more than 200. You might need 250 to be an equivalent thrower, or insert any athlete sport scenario versus yourself.
I think that is a really interesting point. The idea of a framework in which you look to the best competitors, what are their numbers in the gym, what are their physical attributes, and you try and mirror them exactly. That point that Ole made about needing to think about your own strengths is something that's really important and people don't talk about enough. I think in the S&C world, we're always coming from that kind of fix-it approach. So you have a deficit, you bring that deficit up, but there's definitely physical specimens out there that have this ability to sprint faster, lift heavier, do whatever it is. And that makes them great at their sport. So whether you're a javelin thrower and you're squatting 50 kilos more than everyone else, that doesn't mean you should be not focusing on squatting. You should still be pushing your squat up. Those strengths in many cases are the reasons you got to the elite level you're at already. And there's no reason, just because you're ahead of the game with that one particular thing, there's no reason you shouldn't be pushing it to be the best it can possibly be.
Now, sticking with throwers, we've got Sam Mattis, again, on the other end of the spectrum with the squatting, nearly 100 kilos more, so 85 kilos more than Johans squat. He is a discus thrower, so it's interesting to see the changes there. Sam is a particularly strong and powerful thrower, and this 285 kilos, I think, is a PB. As coach Dane Miller said, the hardest you've ever tried, so I assume this is up there. I don't think we've ever actually seen him squat heavier than this. We've seen some big cleans from him, for example, and we've seen some solid squats before. I think around 250 for reps, so I can remember seeing, but I don't think we've seen beyond this 285. Some notable technical points about this lift is the quite narrow stance, pretty toes forward, and he seems to have a pretty nice, what we'd kind of call I assume it looks from the top when he's standing, kind of a hybrid bar position, looks quite low, but then as he gets deeper into the squat, it looks like it's kind of higher up. Very, very strong squat. Certainly, I would think enough for discus throwing. I can't imagine too much more would be majorly productive, but then if he could get it, it would still be productive. It's just what can you commit your time and resources to?
What he does a really good job of here is keeping the knees forward throughout that kind of grindy portion. He talks about it being that was harder than I expected. And you could see that as he stands to parallel and back above parallel, it's the hard part of the squat, right? It's a 1RM or close to that attempt, and it gets pretty grindy. At that point, most people shoot their shins back to vertical, their knees come back, their hips come back, and their torso leans forward even more. In this case, he does a really good job of keeping his knees forward. Now, your knees forward does two things. The first thing it does is it keeps your hips forward and your torso more vertical. So imagine if my hips are connected at the bottom of my torso, the second my hips come back more, my torso inclines forward. But the second thing keeping your knees forward does is it keeps your quads engaged and you're continuously pushing to extend your knees. So that extension of the knees working directly underneath the line of the barbell works to bring that bar up through space rather than you simply extending your knees out in a line away from the barbell and that not working to move the barbell through space.
Next, we've got Jalen and Saquon Barkley, who is kind of hot shit right now in the world of American football. Someone who doesn't watch the sport but is obviously aware of the athletes, so you can see that they are moving some big weights here. 272 odd kilos or 600 pounds. Both of them moving it for a high bar squat. Just kind of at that parallel mark, certainly a sufficient level of depth to be calling it a squat. A couple of interesting things here. First of all is obviously Saquon has outrageous athleticism and power. Obviously we could see that massive jump he did over a player a couple of months ago. Massive pair of quads in him. Absolutely
huge.
Thick pair of quads in him. Like, they're looking, this other dude's quads look kind of small, even though I think Jalen is a pretty decent athlete himself. But Saquon's quads here are eclipsing the other pair of quads.
His quads look like an elephant's testicle hanging over his knees.
Oh, that was an interesting...
Yeah.
Well, also really interesting the fact that Saquon is squatting in vivos. Again, as well, it doesn't look to be near maximal for either of them. It looks like they probably have a couple of more kilos in the back pocket, I would say.
Yeah, you'll see, particularly with Saquon here, as he finishes the squat, he looks up and checks the speed immediately. So up in the top right-hand corner, you have a velocity meter on the barbell. He's throwing that barbell up at the end. Like, he's jumps up at the end of the last squat and walks his feet together into the rack immediately. This definitely looks like that kind of 70% of one rep max range where you could get players working to move the barbell as quickly as possible to produce as much power as possible rather than just these really high force movements that are kind of pushing the top end number as much as they can.
One notable thing about that is the fact that when you're checking those numbers, it would imply to me that he knows what his numbers are at 600 pounds. So the big thing with velocity-based training, if you're going to use it as an athlete, is that you need numbers that are relevant to yourself. You need numbers that are appropriate to what you have, and you need a record of those. So you need to be consistently tracking your velocity if you're going to use it. Once-off numbers don't really tell you a whole lot, especially if you're looking for it in relation to sport-specific performance. So knowing what your speed is and what it could be at these weights, what previous bests have been at that weight for that speed, is really important. So tracking your velocity numbers accurately is really important. So having a record of them is the best way to use it. Now we've got the war of the behind the neck jerks going on in the strongman world, and we've got a few big lifts coming from a lot of people, but we've got the two heaviest ones we've seen so far. We've got Lucas Hatton jerking 251 kilos from behind the neck.
This whole thing is cool, right? We've talked about it here in the news show before. We've talked about it in one or two other videos. This notion of strongman competitors chasing better and more athletic and more efficient positions to bring those eventual weights up, right? So the idea of people split jerking rather than push pressing, or power jerking rather than push pressing. The idea of going to a good overhead position with full elbow extension so they're not working quite as hard to maintain that weight overhead or hold that weight over their head. And the idea that strongman competitions are kind of looking at this and saying this is a good way to be moving, this is a good direction to be moving. I definitely think it's really positive overall. Now, on a somewhat different but concurrent note to that, is it brings me around to this question we've had in the weightlifting world for the last couple of years around the lockout rule, right? So you see how many of these, the lockout's a bit soft. Lockout, what we're talking about is full elbow extension overhead and holding that, so you can't catch it, lock your elbow out, bend it, lock it out again, or you can't catch with a bent elbow and then lock it out. Many people, including myself, had an idea that the weightlifting competition scene would be better if the lockout rule wouldn't exist or didn't exist. But looking at the strongman thing now, and it's certainly something in the next few months as we see the competitions coming up, it's certainly a question I'll be thinking at, or a lens through which I'll be looking at those competitions as saying, is getting rid of the lockout rule going to be better for weightlifting? And what do those kind of less than ideal lockouts actually look like for the sport of strongman? But it's definitely good to see those weights being pushed.
Mm-hmm. So sticking with that subject, we've got BJ Stone with 252.5 kilos on his behind the neck jerk. BJ is definitely one of the most aesthetic strongman lifters when it comes to moving a barbell, and I think he can do a backflip as well. I'm sure he can.
Surely not.
I'm pretty sure he can do a backflip. So he's an Australian strongman, and this 252.5 is excellent. In terms of technique, there's a few things that BJ in particular could change that might be useful. But in terms of the weight overhead, he's an excellent lockout. He's got the good principles of the dip and drive going. So it'll be really interesting to see if someone can surpass him. From what I can tell, it looks like it'll come down to Lucas and BJ for the event. I know a lot of people are talking about Mitchell, but look at Mitchell's heavyweights. He doesn't seem to have the overhead stability or the technique to support 250 plus. In training or in competition. I could be wrong. He certainly has the power available to him to do this lift, but if you look at Mitchell's jerks, that overhead position just isn't stable enough, and it is, no matter how powerful you are, if you can't hold it in a position at the end with stability, obviously it's not going to count, but you're not going to be able to complete a successful rep, whereas people like Lucas and BJ Stone here certainly do have that, very notable as far as strongmen go. Lastly, in the world of running, we have Grant Fisher breaking the 5K world record with 12 minutes, 44 seconds and 0.9 milliseconds. I suppose that's relevant to world records, so you might as well record it. 12:44 in 5Ks. If you don't know anything about running, if you've no interest, 12:44 is like a... It's like a 220 snatch. It's just insane. Like if you ever run a 15-16 minute 5K, you're super fast and very fit. That's a crazy 5K to be running. You'll find a lot of talented athletes could do that in the realm, but getting 12:44 is just insane. It's actually mind-numbing how fast that is. Looks pretty fresh as well, doesn't he?
He does look fresh. I hope to God he's bait after it. Like you have to hope that he can't speak to an interviewer for 10 minutes because he's too. The real mind-blowing thing here, right? So if you take 12:45 across 5 kilometers and you just break that down into a 400 meter pace, just try and run that fast for 400. Try and run that fast for 200 meters if you don't regularly run or do track work. It's going to blow your mind how fast you're moving. And then consider he's moving that fast for nearly 13 minutes. It is absolutely insane. There's elements to this that alter it slightly, like it being the indoor record, so it's a slightly smaller track. You don't have weather conditions. You also don't have the advantages of being outdoors in some cases, so you don't have any weather conditions that might be some tailwind helping you if you were on a straight course. You do have a hell of a lot more turning on these, but 12:44, that pace is blistering.
Crazy. Thanks for watching today's news show. Don't forget to check out the Sika Strength newsletter or the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android.